When you're in a time of transition, one of the best things you can do when you're looking for clarity or direction, how to move forward through that wilderness-like season, is to ask yourself, what was the last thing I heard from God? Or what was the last thing He showed me? It gives you an anchor point because you can camp there or move or live from there until He shows you the next step forward where His grace is flowing, how He's leading you into that next step of your purpose or into the promises He set before you. That's what Jesus did when He was out in the wilderness for those 40 days, and then the devil comes to tempt Him at the end. One of Jesus's rebuttals was, man does not live by bread alone, by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Now the enemy was tempting Him with something different, but the point is that Jesus's answer was that He didn't live by physical circumstances. He didn't live by physical food and what fed Him on the outside and how His life was fed from the external world. His life was fed by the voice of God, and it's not even what proceeded of the words past tense that God had spoke through the prophets and the law when He had given it, but that word is spoken in a very present tense for each of us, that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. It's what we're to live by. It's our sustenance. It's our manna in times of transition or wilderness, unknown in-betweens as we cross those deserts forward, because those deserts oftentimes lie right in between our starting point and that new flourishing promised land ahead of us. One of the best people in Scripture who lived this out was David. And David is known as the man after God's own heart. And I know it's for so many reasons, and the ones we know well are for worship and how he ministered to the Lord. But there's one other aspect that strikes me about the life of David, is that no one else in Scripture do I find the word inquired used more often to describe. David often, more than anyone, inquired of the Lord. What that tells me is he was always looking for God's opinion. He was always after God's heart on the matter and how God saw something or God's way of coming into the situation. I want to inquire of Him in the same way. That's where He gives us those new anchor points, help us go from stepping stone to stepping stone by His fresh voice and how He leads us forward. One time on Mother's Day, I was trying to find a way to encourage my mom and let her know how much she'd blessed me. Words and encouragements normally come very easily and naturally, but they felt trivial at this point in time, and I was trying to figure out, what do I write in the card to bless her? And so I started praying, and that's when it struck me. I remembered a phrase that she'd uttered to my sister and I often growing up, a phrase that isn't probably too different than what a lot of parents wish they could do. And she would always say, I wish I could meet all your needs. I wish I could give you everything you ever needed. Not that that would be healthy if one person could actually meet all your needs, but what I realized in this moment, what I could tell her in the card, is that she had done it. I know that sounds crazy. How could one person meet anyone's everything in their needs? But the reason I could tell her that she had met all my needs was because my mom had taught me how to listen to God. She taught me how to hear His voice. And if I know how to hear His voice, I have everything I could ever need, because I know when to go left, I know when to go right, I know when to pause and to wait, and I know when to charge forward. I can live my life led by the Spirit of God. That's one of the greatest fuels any of us could have in our transition, is continue to practice learning and knowing His voice. Take time to be still. Our world doesn't convey it and bring us into it very naturally. It takes discipline. In those first few minutes, even after years of practicing listening to His voice, I still hit distractions. Often I have to push through those first 5 or 10 or 15 minutes sometimes of distraction until I get in that pure place of hearing His voice, of receiving from Him in new ways. The other thing I do is I mix it up. I go for walks with Him. Sometimes I hear His voice while sitting in a movie and dreaming with Him in different ways. I hear His voice through other people. I hear His voice through His Word. So many different ways. You have to find a way to know Him more, practice that time, get to know how you hear His voice, and then devote yourself to that, because that will be your anchor and your fuel going forward through any and every transition. Type in the comments how you hear His voice. For more content and stories, like and follow us.